That led me to narcissists. I was just like, I just thought narcissists were like serial killers. So it kept pushing me further and further, and I kept researching until I got to the point where this research that I was doing was saying you're not in a good place, and every time it kept giving me red flags, until finally I met someone who actually said to me, she observed my situation, our marriage situation, and she said to me, I don't usually say this to people because it's not my business, but when I left your house, I was full of fear, and I can only imagine what your life is like when it's just two of you. You need to get out. You're not safe. And that was the first thing I said. Look at domestic violence. I still didn't believe it was domestic violence because I just heard violence, and my mind is, well, we're not having physical contact, so it can't be violence. And she said, no, look at the emotional and psychological bits. And interestingly, when I began to search emotional abuse, psychological abuse, it led to the financial bit, it led to sexual violence, it led to all sorts of things. Literally, even phrases, things that were spoken to me in the house, these were examples on the internet. And I was like, oh my goodness, how could I have never known this? How come I never saw this all this while? So there is a lot of information out there for domestic violence, but you'll be surprised how many people have never heard of these things. You'll be surprised. So it was based on that lady speaking to me that I realized that, right, this is the situation. I need to start researching on domestic violence. And it still took me another 4 or 5 months before I could make that decision to actually get up and go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And talking about children, right? Like, you have two kids and a few
Yeah.
marriage, and silent watches again, like, as the title of your book says, um, the impact of it towards your kids.
Yeah.
So how was it? I mean, how did they react to the whole thing? And now, um, as things have improved, like, you have finally gotten out of that grip of domestic violence, and now functioning as an independent person without the abuse. Um, how how are they seeing you now, and what was their reaction back then, especially when the abuse started?
Um, to be honest, my kids were born into abuse, so I was already going through abuse while I got and then I got pregnant and I had the children. Interestingly, at the time, and which is the mistake a lot of parents, especially women, make, we feel like we can cover the abuse, we can cover it, we can protect our children. We'll lock ourselves in the bedroom, we'll have fights, we'll have arguments, and then we'll protect the children. But interestingly, that's not even possible because at the
Mm-hmm.
time, I felt like I was doing the best to protect the children, to shield them from the abuse. But in my case, there's certain things that just couldn't work. So, for instance, one of our biggest arguments when my son was almost 4 years old was my son going to school. So, having a child that wasn't allowed to go to play groups, to the play center, to the playgrounds, he's just locked in the house. You can imagine the psychological effect on him. He wasn't going out, but I tried to create something in the house so he doesn't miss out of what goes on outside. I tried to get toys, I tried to make things. But then it's not the same thing as trying to raise a child in a small living room and letting them interact with the world. By the time my son actually had the opportunity, after much arguments, to go into a school, I started getting referrals. Oh, he's not interacting with anyone. He doesn't notice people. He's not conscious of people. And even at that time, I thought, okay, wow, this is a boy that has been in the house for several years, never interacted with anyone, never gone anywhere. So maybe he's a bit not too used to school and all. And I thought it would change, but it never actually changed. And then I started getting referrals for on the pathway for autism, you know, autistic spectrum
Mm-hmm.
disorder. And yeah, I still assume that, okay, well, things happen, maybe the wrong mix of genes and stuff like that. But now looking back, I've done excellent amount of research, and I found out that even though we can't actually say that domestic violence causes autism, but there's lots of research that shows that trauma can cause autism, learning difficulties, and all that. And domestic violence causes trauma on a woman, and it causes trauma to the children. So domestic violence and the trauma can actually affect a fetus. So raising a pregnancy in a violent or a toxic home is enough to alter the child's cognitive development. And these are things that I never knew. And that's why I say when I make my pitch out there to women and to families, I don't tell them, oh, you need to leave your relationship because you're in a bad place. Lots of people will say, no, I'm going to try to save my home. But then they're trying to save their home because of the children. So when they find out that, hey, do you know, being pregnant in an abusive home can alter your child. Your child could be born with autism or learning difficulties. You could have a miscarriage based on the trauma. You could have children that grow up to have PTSD, anxiety. They have just a lot of stuff around their emotions, anxiety. If they find out that, they might think, okay, fine, I'm staying here for my children, but I'm destroying them, and I'm actually destroying their generation. So, for instance, for someone like my son now, he's born autistic, right? Or he's diagnosed with autism. He was fine up till he was 2.5 years old, and then he started regressing from 2.5 years old. So he passed all his developmental checks, but from 2.5 years old, after 2.5 years old check, he started regressing. His words started failing. He started losing his words. His understanding began to fail. His emotions were all over the place. He would get angry for no reason. He would throw things. He would smash stuff. He would not want to express himself at all. All of this stuff, I didn't understand what they were. I just thought, okay, fine.
Mm-hmm.
My ex-partner, has a lot of anger tantrums, so maybe that's where it's coming from. Maybe he sees all the aggression in the house and he's speaking that up. So I used to try to calm him down. He, after a period of time, had no interest in emotional attachments. I mean, for a young child of 2 years old, he doesn't want to hug, he doesn't want to cuddle, he doesn't want any of those things. We couldn't tell when he was happy or when he was sad. He just didn't understand his emotions. And these are some of the things that living in an environment that is unsafe and unhealthy for the children can cause. So basically, children witnessing domestic violence is child abuse. Now, for instance, stuff around not letting a child go to school, not letting a child interact with people, not letting a child access help and intervention that is due them. That's also child abuse because that's neglect. A lot of people in abusive homes, you find out that the same treatment that is given to the woman is given to the children. So if the woman is not allowed to leave the house, the children are not allowed to leave the house. If the woman is not allowed to eat certain kind of things, the children as well are not allowed to eat certain kinds of things. So when we think that we're protecting our children, they're also suffering. Now, inside all of that mayhem, my daughter was born as well. Now, she was different from my son. She started sitting down up on time, started walking, running, doing all that stuff, started trying to babble and chat, which is different. In fact, she had more words than him, even though she's 3 years younger than him. But then guess what? She wasn't allowed to go to nursery, play groups, interact with other children. She was just in the house doing just with me. I tried my best, which is reading, showing her stuff on YouTube, doing all that stuff. But to be honest, that's not enough. So she grew up being comfortable with me and her brother. But when you took her out of the house, she would not talk to anyone. And that started from when she got to about 2.5 years old. It was so bad that at her 2.5 year check, when I took her to the health visitors to have a check just to check that everything is functional, they said everything about her is fine, but does she speak? Because she would not talk. So I literally had to play them a video of her talking at home so that they could see that she talks. And that's the effect of children going through domestic violence, living in an environment. Now, there's so much, I put so much in my book about how bad it was with the kids and me trying to sort of like give them a normal life in the house. But what people need to understand is that there is no way you can give a child a normal life in a place that is abnormal. It's like growing up in the middle of a war. There's
Mm-hmm.
bombs falling, there's people screaming, and you're saying, oh no, I'm just going to have my tent here and make it normal. How can you make that normal when there's bombs and there's crying and there's killing and it's just not possible. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not possible to raise a child in an abusive home. You need to leave them. And children, I always say this, children will do best in a safe and loving environment, whether it's with one parent or two parents. You understand? Some people just don't work together, and because they don't work together, it affects the children. But separate from each other, they might actually be able to raise their children and be happy raising their children individually. Now,
Mm-hmm.
fast forward, I left an abusive home. While I was in there, my son had so many issues. I literally cannot recount all of them, but I'll give you one example. So up until the age of 6, right, when my son was in school, he could have accidents up to 6 times between 9 a.m. and 3 in school. Like so much accidents, he would just keep wetting himself, and there was no idea. We didn't know what was going on. The schools tried everything, interventions. They tried every single thing to help him. We tried. They were like, "Is it an infection?" We tried everything, but he was potty trained. So once he goes to school, he just starts having accident over accident. They'll have to change his shirt, his trouser, his shoes 6 times every day. Now, I left at the end of January, and in the first week of February, he started a new school. Obviously, I went to the school, I had a conversation. Oh, my son has accidents, he doesn't know how to go to the toilet, and this and that. So I tried to prepare them so they know. I went to pick him, he didn't have an accident. And he has not had an accident in school for the last, next year is going to be 4 years. He used to be sick all the time. Like his attendance in school was about 60%. Ever since I left that abusive environment, he's not been sick. His attendance in school is always 100% or 99.9. Now, that's how much a child changed. There was no medical treatment, there was nothing done to change him. All I did was change his environment. And a lot of times, because I'm always, some people will be like, oh, I don't want to go to the doctors, the psychologist. I'm about giving my children the best. So I accessed as many services as possible. But I kept hearing the same thing from the services. What have you done to this child? He's changing. He's changed so much. Now, before I left, right, in January, my son was assessed, and his level of social communication, right, was assessed at the age of 5 as that of a 12-month-old baby. That's how much he regressed. Couldn't understand anything. Between January and August, when he was January and July, when he was assessed again, his social communication was at his level. So within 6 months, he began to communicate with people as a 6-year-old child without speech language therapy, without anything.
Mm-hmm.
It means that that environment was not good at all. It
Mm-hmm.
taught her, she started talking as well, started expressing herself, started doing a whole lot of things. And today they're like different children. I mean, there's some issues that I know we still have to keep because it's a journey. We keep working on it to make sure it gets better. But the point is, there's so much change that happens, and that's why I share my story in my book, because parents can read this book and they can see, wow, is this why my child is like this? Teachers are reading my book now here in England, south of England and south east of England, because a lot of times professionals put so much effort. I remember how much effort they put into my son, and they weren't getting much progress. But that's because he was in a toxic home. They do so much in school, but he goes back home to that toxic environment where there's no love, there's no peace, there's shouting, there's all that. So professionals are reading this book now and they're saying, now, okay, fine, this child that is not progressing, potentially there might be something else going on at home. Sometimes professionals can see that there's an issue in the house, but if a parent hasn't come out to say, I'm having issues, the professional can't do much. So, what some of the professionals are doing now is referring the book to people that they suspect might be having issues at home. Because one thing is, when people read a story, they begin to see their lives in that story and they're like, okay, hang on, this is my story. I should do something about it. So, that's basically
Mm-hmm.
our journey
Mm-hmm.
so far.
Right, right. Fantastic. I mean, um, looking at the improvements, that have happened in the past on your children, it's tremendous to learn that, changing the environment, that kids live in can have a huge impact.
What I did! The fucking is for you!